Welcome into the Coaching Clubhouse with Adrian Last.
Hello and welcome into the Coaching Clubhouse. I'm Adrian Last, a professional coach, a marketer and a presenter. And this is our monthly conversation about the fascinating world of coaching. Now, we've got a bit of a first today in the sense that not only is this a podcast series, but there's also a video to go alongside it. So if you're listening to the podcast and you prefer to see the pictures to go with the sound, head over to YouTube and just do a search and you'll find us right there. Let me introduce you to my guest for today. Simone Sweeney is a certified executive and leadership coach who helps dynamic professionals remove barriers to achieve their ambitions and thrive at work and at home, a subject we're going to be talking about very shortly. Simone worked in marketing and retail for 25 years, then went into coaching and is also the host of the Future of Leadership is Human podcast for the Association for Coaching. Simone, it's great to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us in the Coaching Clubhouse.
Thanks so much, Adrian. I'm delighted to be with you today.
And I'm really pleased to have another podcast host with me today because this has not happened to me before. And I feel like I've got to be on my best behavior.
I'm sure I'll learn quite a lot from you today as well. So it's nice for us to kind of play off of each other in that sense too.
Now, your story is a really interesting one, a hugely successful career in marketing, impressive companies like Apple and Lego on your CV. Now you're running Arise Coaching and Consulting. Tell us about corporate life and how your experience supports coaching clients.
Yeah. So I spent 25 years at the corporate coalface, working mostly in tech with companies like Motorola, and you mentioned Apple, but also dips into HP. And Palm, if you remember the old Palm Pilot as well, before moving to toys with the Lego Group. And I was highly fortunate in my career. I worked for incredible companies and worked with incredible companies because I worked alongside people like Microsoft, Google, Disney, Nike, a lot of the brands that we as marketers kind of know and love. And also had the opportunity to work on an international basis. All of my roles, save my very first one, which was, still in the old millennia, were in regional or global roles. So I had a chance to work across different cultures, across different kind of contexts as well. And that gave me great exposure to different ways of working, different ways of thinking, different leadership practices, certainly different marketing and branding experiences as well. And so when I was thinking about what was next in my career about 3 years ago, I looked to the one thing that was the constant across all of those roles, all of those companies, and that was people. In the corporate world, it's all about relationships. I have had great fortune to mentor and then coach several people, more in the casual way. And then when I was thinking about what I would do next, I was looking for something that would blend these incredible corporate experiences I have with the leadership lessons, with the fantastic relationships that I've developed over the years, and all the hard lessons I learned. And coaching was just a really great opportunity to kind of bring those together. So thus Arise Coaching and Consulting was born after some training and some kind of rethinking.
And that journey for you in terms of marketing and branding, it really must teach you some interesting kind of lessons in both sort of life, working with people, working with brands. And I suppose part of that is, looking at our own personal brands to a certain extent. Talk to us a little bit more about the sort of marketing part of your career and how that led on.
Yeah, and it's also great speaking to you as a fellow marketeer because you have that kind of context and depth of experience. And, if you think of ourselves, we are unique individuals. We have strengths. We have our development areas, our foibles. We all have our unique kind of vision of the world and how we see ourselves in it. And, in a work context, how we show up, how we feel, may not necessarily always be readily available. I'm sure we can all cast our minds back to that situation where you behaved in a particular way to conform or to make an impression on a leader or to react to something that was happening. And that kind of story of ourselves at work is something that I think we need to be more intentional about. And just like marketing, where you're marketing a product or a service or an experience, understanding what is at the core of that, the values, the vision, those unique character strengths in the case of people, but maybe the universal selling points, unique selling points for a product or a service. It's a very similar thing when we are trying to create a persona, to develop a relationship, to maybe look for a new job and to position ourselves as the candidate that you really want to hire. Being very mindful of who we are, what we stand for, what our values are, what we'd like to get from that, and what we're going to bring to the relationship, to the table, to the new role, to that experience, whatever that case is going to be, is largely driven by the brand that you can kind of curate and then create. So I think a personal brand is very important for us as employees. And that's probably no more important than at the point when we're moving into something new, whether that's looking for a new job or starting a new job and building new relationships, or even starting out on our own as an entrepreneur or as a small business owner. So your brand, at the basic of what you stand for and who you are and what you can do, I think is a really, really important thing that I certainly didn't think enough about earlier in my career. It is something that I really focus on these days with my clients, and that I've got on a real journey with myself in the last kind of 5 years or so as well.
It's so true, isn't it? That everything you've said about personal brand. And I think my experience of it is that a lot of people don't spend enough time on it. And it's a bit like a decorator who doesn't have time to decorate his own or her own house. Marketers in some ways are the same, in the sense that we get stuck into our job and don't spend enough time actually marketing ourselves and working out what our own personal brand is. And actually we sort of talk in branding terms about distinctiveness and relevance and personality, and those things are never more true than when we think about ourselves and how everybody else sees us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're talking about relevance, for example, and personality. If you think of marketing, the first place you start is with an audience. What's the need of that audience for the product or the service you're going to create? It's really similar for how we think or should think about personal branding, is who are we trying to speak to? What do they need to know about us? How are you going to create those connections? It's a really similar process to kind of classic marketing in terms of building your own personal brand and effectively marketing yourself.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Let's move on to talk more about your coaching, Simone. And I really like the way you describe what you do and what you offer. And I'm just going to read this. Helping busy professionals who aren't bringing their best at work or home because they're stuck, stretched and stressed to identify and make positive change and overcome limiting beliefs. Really love that. What are the success stories you've seen in coaching people? Where have you seen that have real impact?
Yeah. And maybe just before I speak to that, just to say that, that was me 5 years ago, 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, is that, busy running around between kids, between work, between trying to also keep up with friends and family and your own well-being. We take a lot on ourselves. And I think most people, in whatever role you're in these days, everything is just more demanding, faster paced, more. So I'm really grounding that in what I have experienced, but also what I see. And I work with a lot of clients who are facing some kind of barrier. That could be a difficult relationship, particularly a difficult relationship with a boss. It could be someone who is trying to progress to the next level or find a new role, but there's just something that's preventing them being considered in that space. Could be a competency, it could be a behavior, it could be just not knowing how to get started with it. Or someone who is fundamentally kind of challenged in what they want and not quite defining what they need at a particular point. So I work with a lot of people who are at a point of, let's say, career transition, either wanting the next thing or thinking, I've got here and I've worked so hard, but I don't like here anymore and I don't know what else I can do. So, some of the success stories and some of the things that would be maybe my favorite outcomes. Recently, I worked with a group of leaders in a fairly new leadership structure, and we did a lot of work around identifying strengths. So understanding what each brings in terms of their unique strengths to that team dynamic, but then talking very openly about their areas of development, or we could call them weaknesses or challenges, all of those things. And their areas of kind of aspiration where they'd like to develop. And then looking at them, in that context of individuals creating a collective as the team and using the strengths of the individuals to bring to the team to support the team and make the team stronger and perform better and build trust in those relationships, but also to offset some of those developmental or weaknesses that might exist. And what was really special about that work is that we looked at all the individual strengths and people were able to kind of own and celebrate those. And that, is as true for an individual as in this kind of teamwork I'm speaking to. But then to look and speak very openly about, we all have things that we're not great at. We all have things that we don't like to do. So knowing that you, Emma, really enjoy public speaking and that Jack really hates it, then let's lean into Emma's joy for that and take Jack's incredible empathy in terms of change. So just looking at that type of dynamic, those experiences for me are really rich when we're able to look at the individual strengths and kind of play into them. And the individual stories, where someone has kind of agonized over their career and had that light bulb moment, which almost always involves them finding that answer within themselves, because the answer always. A coach is there to help you kind of tease that out, think of it differently, maybe give you some resources and tools that help you get to that answer more quickly. But those breakthroughs are always the really special ones. And I'm sure that's something that you can relate to in the work that you're doing as well.
Absolutely. And there's nothing, well, there is a lot more satisfying, but there's a very satisfying thing when you're working with a client and a coachee, when actually there's a pause and the light bulb, you can see the light bulb go off and it's kind of, okay, that is really interesting. I had that recently actually with somebody, and it's fascinating and hugely rewarding actually for the coachee to get to that kind of moment. I love that. It's so important.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing, just picking up on the last bit you said there, is as a coach, and coaches listening to this will recognize this. One of the things when you first start coaching people is that you have to, the listening part of coaching is so important, and trying to put out of your head your own view as to what your coachee might do. So coming up with a solution. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's about the fact that, as you said, that a coachee has the answers, and actually our job is to listen, to ask the right questions, sometimes challenging questions that actually unlock that, rather than actually diving in with, well, this is what I would do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most aha moments in the coaching training is that, you might think you have the answers, but that's based on your bias, your experience. So by listening, by asking questions, by creating also that, to be a bit cheesy here, that safe space for a coachee to explore what that looks like for them, what they're experiencing, what they're considering, and know that there isn't something being projected onto it. And it isn't hopefully going to have a negative impact in terms of it going back to someone or someone's leader finding out about it or them being judged in any way. That is what creates those breakthrough moments. And that's one of the magic elements of coaching, is just to be able to create that environment and to kind of nudge and support the coachee along the way as they get to those kind of revelations themselves.
Now, sometimes people think coaching is a work thing, and just picking up on some of what you were saying in the last answer, but it's actually, home life is as important, if not more important than work life. And actually, one of my previous guests, when talking about redundancy, said that, your job does not define you. And I love that actually. But it sort of talks to the importance of home life. And I know it's something that you've kind of covered in some of your podcasts and in some of your LinkedIn posts. Why is home as important as work? It seems like an obvious answer. But how have you seen this change over the last few years, and what can coaching do to support that?
Yeah. And, I think that COVID almost brought into sharp relief something that everyone has realized lately, is that there are very blurry lines these days between work and home. Even if we are on holiday, if you're not actively checking your email and thinking about it, or issuing instructions and straight on to work when you get back, you're probably thinking about it. We can't just divorce ourselves from the reality. And therefore, we need to be much more mindful about what happens outside of the kind of the boundaries of work, not just outside of office hours and the office environment, but in terms of like almost a divorce from how we're working. And that, we were forced into that a little bit more as a confrontation with COVID, because work and home kind of converged so spectacularly. We were doing everything in the same space. And for those with kids or caring responsibilities, that was in there too. So you didn't have kind of the delineation between the different spaces and the different times that we had before. And, within the kind of context of thinking about your personal life, work, life balance just generally, lots of people are thinking about it in different ways. Just, I think, being very specific to know that we have to make time for ourselves, because the energy that's needed to succeed at work, to not just get up and get out of bed in the morning, but to work through a problem, to drive change, to innovate, to relate to the people we work with or the teams that we may lead. We need to be invested in that. And if you're stressed, if you're burned out, if you're tired, if your heart's not in it, your resilience is low. This is what burnout is. Burnout is stress that has continued for too long, is prolonged and affecting us in other kind of dimensions like our well-being. So if we're not making time to kind of rejuvenate, to reset, to even just change the pace so that our brains can reset and be more receptive to new ideas, then we are just going, and that just almost contributes more to the stress that we're going to experience. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that our brains also can't distinguish when we react emotionally, or then we have feelings, whether we're in the office or we're at home with our loved ones. It's our response. And so if we're never creating that opportunity to kind of reset and recharge and focused on our well-being and doing the things that kind of top up our energy, bring back, our perspective, then we just get so eroded and worn down. So it is something I talk about a lot. I think it's something that through the course of my last years in the corporate world and COVID specifically, when I stopped traveling all the time and was able to slow down a bit and spend more time with my kids, to then moving into coaching and being self-employed, it has become more and more important to me. And the more research and the more experts I speak to, and the more coaches and also coachees and look at their struggles, the more important it becomes. We need to recharge and reset. And you cannot do that if you're always on. And if work bleeds into every aspect of your life, your brain never has a chance to switch off. And it really just comes down to that.
Yeah, completely agree. And it feels to me, I'd agree with what you said at the start of that answer. COVID and the pandemic really accelerated that sort of feeling of being always on. And I think it was always, it was kind of gathering pace anyway with technology, but that really exacerbated the situation. So I think as leaders and managers at work in companies, as well as being self-employed as you are, and as you said, it's so important to look after our well-being. And certainly I've coached some people that have not got great well-being, and we've had a really interesting and good conversation about that, which has actually unlocked some stuff at the end.
Yeah, it's great to hear, that you're focusing on that. It's so important. And, maybe stating the absolutely blindingly obvious, well-being won't change unless you actually do something about it. So something has to give. You need to either make a choice, or you are faced with the reality that if you don't do something, you're going to be in trouble. So, that often can come to, almost a head where people have either an emotional, mental, or physical collapse because we haven't focused on the well-being enough. So by being mindful about it and being focused on it, and where coaching can help to just kind of get that perspective, then you're moving the needle so that you don't have to get to that point of the forced break. And that's, the rise of mindfulness, even if it's not full on meditation and people kind of really investing it, just self-reflection and a bit of breathing space is a great place to start. And one of the tips I learned through, the journey I've been on, but also shared in one of the episodes of the podcast, The Future of Leadership is Human, on well-being is, just thinking of one thing you can do for yourself every day is already a massive step forward in your well-being. If you can do one positive thing, it could be reading your book for 10 minutes, or could be having an extra 10 minutes long, hot shower, or walking the last few stops instead of taking the bus or the tube. So, those little steps are the first thing that we can do to tweak and improve our well-being. And that's a really great place to start when you're feeling busy and overwhelmed.
Totally. Now, we'll come back to the podcast in a moment, Simone. I just wanted to pick up on something you were talking about earlier on, and that's that I think can be described as a human-centric approach at work. And it's another thing that feels to me like has gathered pace in recent years is the a lot of what you read in kind of trade press about authenticity. I don't mind that word, but actually I really like the way you've described it. Energy, emotion, two words that are really important for us as leaders and managers in organizations, probably for anybody actually. Why do you think it's so important, and why have you kind of written about this in some of your posts?
Yeah. So look, I think there are so many schools of thought of leadership out there, and that most of us probably grow up in an environment where you see a very successful leader, typically a male leader, and that's the reality we live in. I'm not going to, there's no kind of baggage to that, but you might see very decisive behaviors. Strength of character, high levels of confidence, charisma, innovation, drive, ambition. And we kind of form this idea in our mind of what the ideal leader looks like. And we revere a lot of leaders. You'll have, all of us will have the archetypal leader, and I'm not going to kind of name any of them here, but, we're all probably thinking of the dynamic leader behind, whether it's a politician or a business leader or a celebrity. And what you kind of then tend to create is this expectation of behavior. And when we first become leaders, typically we don't become a leader because we've demonstrated great leadership skills and we're going to, be granted this team to nurture and to support. Typically you move into your leadership journey because you've excelled at your area of expertise. You have a high degree of competence in finance or law or marketing, in my case. And so people think, well, you're really good at this skills area, so we're going to get you to lead other people who are skilled in this area. But what you may not be a great expert in is motivating people and dealing with the reality of people. And as I've kind of progressed through my career, and I've seen some fantastic leadership behaviors and some really bad ones, and I'm sure we can all think of lots of bad behavior that we've seen or experienced directly. I've really thought about what it means to be a good leader, and thinking back on my career, to those I worked with, to the people I read about or I learned from, they were the people that connected on the human level. They had good empathy. They had personal energy. They were invested in what they were doing and they believed in it. And even if they thought that it was hard, or they maybe didn't see the kind of the great positive side of things, they would galvanize their energy and their people in the direction and inspire and support and nurture, rather than commanding and directing and criticizing, which is often, sadly, a case of that kind of more directive leadership style. So it just makes good sense to me, and to, there's a lot of other thinkers in this space who've a lot more experience and expertise than I, that really see that those things that make us human, our empathy, our ability to connect, our communication, our resilience, our innovation and creativity, are actually the things that build the human connections and get people to become invested in our relationship, in the project, in the company, in the direction we're all striving for. So, energy and emotion are critical to that, because those are such human behaviors. And so that's something for me that really underpins what leadership should look like when it's at its very best, that by connecting and being genuine, you mentioned authenticity earlier, by really being real and honest and open and building trust, that's how you motivate people. That's how you drive change. That's how you inspire people, as well as keeping them happy, invested, and content, which is great for retention as well for your people. Yeah,
absolutely. Let's move on to the podcast. Set it up for us, Simone. Tell us what it's called, what can we learn, and where do we find it?
Fantastic. So it's a podcast for the Association for Coaching, which is one of the world's leading bodies for coaches, and supporting coaches, mentors, thought leaders who are looking, to improve the world through that kind of coaching and exploration dynamic. And the series itself is called The Future of Leadership is Human. And in it, we investigate exactly that, why there are other ways of leading from those that I've just kind of spoken towards, that more old school, traditional, driven leader, and how those behaviors and skills that make us wonderful people to know and connect with also can be brought to life in the workplace. And it is very grounded in, the series investigates how you can be a human-centric leader. So the types of competencies and behaviors that are critical to that. So high emotional intelligence, or EQ, how you can build great communication, how you collaborate well, how you inspire and support your people or those you work with, if you're not directly leading people. But we also look in it at the importance of well-being, how to use that authentic human connection to create a truly inclusive world in your work environment. So diversity, inclusion, equity, within the kind of also terms of belonging, how important that is, and how human-centric leaders drive more inclusion, just naturally by that very kind of humanity of them. And we also really interestingly explored the role of technology, and how, as things like AI become more prevalent in the world of work, then there's more opportunity for the human area to thrive, and how what will ultimately distinguish us from the machines, and there's a place for both, I believe. But those human elements, like being a great leader, being creative, innovative, problem solving, entrepreneurship, those things cannot at this stage, and hopefully never, be replaced with tech. So the podcast explores that, talking to all sorts of thought leaders, coaches, and specialists in the area, as well as leaders themselves. So it was a really great foray. It's only 9 episodes, so it's something that you can kind of dip in and dip out of, and each one of them follows a theme. So it's available now wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., or you can get it from the Association for Coaching itself.
Now, you've had some fascinating guests on your series, including the renowned psychologist and author Daniel Goleman. Amongst the guests, including Daniel, what were the inspiring stories? What's the story that really resonated with you?
I think there are probably 2 things that kind of really step out from the sessions. And, I learned so much from all of them. So there were little nuggets of wisdom and some very big nuggets for me in each one of them. So I mentioned earlier the well-being with Bernadette Thomas, about doing that one small thing a day. I had a fantastic conversation with Blair Palmer about AI and the rise of technology, and that how you're kind of taking that even further. Right now, our work is typically guided by a lot of process tasks, even if it's doing our expenses, creating reports, writing strategy, sending updates on our program, our project, our work. So those kind of status reports, having meetings where we're kind of just connecting. All of those things are really admin heavy, kind of based on a Victorian way of thinking, where you had kind of an overseer, a boss, like an old school boss, supervising and managing us. And the world has really changed from that. So where, if you could almost delegate some of those process tasks that are actually quite mindless to tech, then that's where our creative, verve and progress is really going to come from. The other, profound takeaway I took from it was really a lot of the conversation with Daniel Goleman on emotional intelligence. So, he said to me at one point in the conversation is emotions are contagious. And if you think of that, not just in your work life, but in your personal life, when you react strongly, it sets the tone for your partner, your team, your children. And, our ability to regulate ourselves, to kind of connect and manage our emotion really is dictated by, our kind of confidence, our presence in ourself, our, even having that time to reflect and reset. And kind of escape some of the stresses of the day to day. And so that kind of statement from Dan on emotions really influencing those around you and setting the tone was such a great watch out for me. And I find myself thinking about it every single day.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I would absolutely encourage and urge everybody listening to check out your podcast. It's absolutely worth the listen, and lots of brilliant stories in there and brilliant guests as well. Thanks,
Adrian. I appreciate it. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So finally, Simone, because we have sadly run out of time, even though we could talk for the next hour, I'm sure. Tell us where we can find out more about you and how to get in contact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear from anyone. Comments, feedback, really important. We talk about that also a lot on the podcast. So you can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm Simone Sweeney, or you can find my website, which is thrivewitharise.com. And really keen to hear from anyone. So it's been such a pleasure having a chat with you today.
My pleasure, Simone. Thank you so much for joining me, and best of luck with the podcast, with the coaching, and with life in general.
Thanks. Yes. And I'll continue enjoying your podcast series as well. I think you have a lot to offer, and it's great to hear the different perspectives and experiences. It always gets me thinking. So I will continue to recommend yours as well, and look forward to all of the coming episodes.
Excellent. Thanks again.
Thanks, Adrian.
And that's it for today's edition of the Coaching Clubhouse. A big thanks again to Simone Sweeney for being my guest today. I'll be back in a few weeks' time with the final podcast of 2024. But for now, thanks for listening, and see you very soon.
The Coaching Clubhouse is produced by Adrian Last Coaching. Discover more on the website at adrianlast.co.uk.